Hello friends, I welcome you all to my channel. This video is part of the playlist Python Basics Programming Beginner's Daily Dose, where I come up with videos on fundamental concepts of Python so that beginner level Python developers will get an insight of how Python works behind the scenes. In this video, I will discuss about how this video is basically for those programmers who are not aware that else clause can be used with try statement. So let's get started. Okay, so the basic syntax of the try except the try statement is that you have a try clause, you have something, you have some code, and then you have you catch the exception if there is any. Let's say you catch the exception, and then you have the finally block. So this is the basic structure of the try statement if you are not yet aware of the fact that else clause can be used. Now else clause is basically usually mentioned after the except clause. So here we have a else clause. Now let me give you a brief idea of how all the clauses works overall with the try statement. So inside the try clause you do something, and with a possibility of throwing an exception. If there is an exception, then it will fall back to the except clause. It will do whatever code is there inside the except clause, and if there is irrespective of the fact whether there was an exception or not, eventually the final thing that will be executed is the code inside the finally clause. So the code inside the finally clause will anyway be executed whether there was an exception or not. Now, so when else clause will be executed? Else clause will be executed only when there was no exception thrown inside the try clause. So whatever you do inside the try clause, if there is no exception, then all the statements inside the try clause will finish, and then it will fall back to the else clause, and it will finish the else all the statements inside the else clause, and then it will fall back to the finally clause. So let's try to see how it works with very simple code. Let's say I just do try ended. Over here I say that we just print the exception, and inside the else clause we say yo there was no exception, and finally we say we are done, or rather actually a cleanup code is written inside the finally clause. So we are done. Let's say we are done. Now if we execute this code, definitely there is an exception inside the try clause. It will print a try ended. It will not execute the except clause. It will not, and then it will execute the else clause because there was no exception. So it will print yo there was no exception, and at the end anyway the finally clause will be executed. It will print we are done. So if we run this code, what do we get? We get try ended, and let me okay, so we see try ended, yo there was no exception, we are done. Okay, now let's say there is an exception inside the try clause. Let's say we deliberately write throw raise an exception, some exception, raise 2. Now in this case, since there was an exception, it will this try ended will not be executed at this point of time. At this point there will be an exception, and the flow will go inside the exception except clause. It will print exception, and else will not be executed since there was an exception, and at the end the finally clause will be printed. So we are done. So it will print the exception and we are done. So exceptions must derive from whatever it says something, and then we are done. Okay. Now let's try to now regarding the. So I hope you have understood how all the clauses work with the try statement. Now, if you return something from any of these clauses, like the try clause, except, else, or finally clause, then you need to understand how the return statement works. Let's say we are trying to write a function. We are trying to divide two numbers. I am taking a very basic example. We are trying to divide two numbers, let's say x and y, and we use this try statement. We use this try statement and we try to evaluate. X by y, and we are removing the print statement. Inside the try statement we do the actual functionality, that is we divide x by y, store the result in the result variable, and in the exception clause, if there is an exception, it will throw an exception if y is 0. So divide by 0 will throw exception. So it will print exception, whatever is there is given by the Python interpreter, and then else will not be executed. Else will be executed only if the division was successful. So over here, what we do is we will say write result equals to. We will write say result equals to result. Since whatever functionality we intend to implement inside the try clause, it was successful, and so we in the else clause we would like to process whatever results we got inside the from the try clause. So we are printing the result, and finally we are printing we are done. Now if we execute this function, let's say with some value which will not throw an exception, what do we get? We get result is 0.5, we are done. So this did not throw any exception, and this was so it went to then else clause, and the result equals to was printed, and then we are done. And what if we try to call this function with y as 0, then it will throw exception. It will say division by 0, and we are done. Okay, now let's say we would like to return the result from this function. Now okay, so we can use return statement from any we can write a return statement in any of the clause. There are 4 clauses: try, except, else, and finally. Let's say we would like to return the result from here. We would like to return the result from here, but it may be possible that y was 0. So the result will over here there will be an exception, and basically the result will be none, and in the exception it will print exception something, else will not be printed. So if we do this and let's say if we do this 2 divided by 4, then what will be returned? Let's say we are saving the result in a variable and we are printing the result. In this case we will definitely see something like we are done and 0.5. This 0.5 is the for this print statement. Okay, fine. Now, what if we write a return statement here also? Now I am explaining if you have a return statement in all the clauses, how it works. See, if you have a return statement inside the try, and if that return statement is reached, I mean there was no exception, the return statement is the final statement, it was reached, meaning there was no exception inside the try clause. Okay, and you are returning the same thing at the end of the finally clause. In this case, this return statement will be ignored. If there is a return statement in the finally clause as a last statement, that return value will eventually be returned from this function. So, to differentiate that which return was executed, let's say I am returning the return into 2 from the finally clause. Now, if I run this code, this result will be 1. Let's see. So we are getting 1. This result is 0.5. This was not returned from the function. This was returned. Result multiplied by 2 is 1. So this was returned. So you can see that a return statement inside the finally clause will overwrite or will dominate the return statement inside the try clause. Now what if since okay, but why it is not printing? Also see that this else part is not executed. This else part is not executed. This is because perhaps we have done a return inside the try clause. Inside the try clause, we have done a return result. This is the reason we are not seeing this print statement. If I, for the moment, comment this return statement, then there was no exception in the try clause. It should fall back to the else clause, and you see the syntax highlighting. When I commented this thing, this is in normal highlighting. Now, as soon as the moment I uncomment this code, you see this thing becomes grayed. I mean, grayed out means this is this VS Code. This is a VS Code is trying to say that this code will never be executed because there is a return statement in the try. So if there is a return statement in the try clause, and if there was no exception, it will not fall back to else part. So the else part will be executed only when there is no exception inside the try clause and there is no return statement. So keep this thing in mind. And let's say what? Okay, so okay. Now, what if there is an exception? What if there is an exception and I return something? Let's say I return -1. Let's say the function, the specification of the function says that if the division is not successful, we are just trying to make up an example. If the division is not successful, then we return -1. So in this case, if y is 0, it will fall back to except clause, and we are returning -1. But in the finally clause also, we are returning result multiplied by 2. So what will happen? It will try to divide, we are executing the function, invoking the function with y as 0. So over in this line, there will be an exception, meaning result will be none. This thing will not be executed, result will be none, and it will execute the except clause. It will print exception something, and it will remember that there is a return -1, and finally it will come to the finally clause. We are done, but over here there will be an error because right now result is none, and it will throw an exception while trying to do this multiplication. So let's see what happens. Unbound local error, return, but return result into the, you see, unbound local error cannot access local variable result where it is not associated with a value. So result has no value. So because it is none, you cannot do a you cannot evaluate none multiplied by 2. So this is you have to keep in mind. And what if, let's say, what if we are let's say we are returning 4, just for the sake of understanding, we are returning 3 from the finally clause. So in this example, the try clause, inside the try clause there will be an exception because we are trying to divide by 0. Y is 0, it will fall back to except clause, there will be an exception, and from the except clause we are returning -1, but this -1 will not be returned since there is a return statement in the finally clause. This will override this, and we will have the whole function will return 3 and it will print 3. So it is printing 3. So any return statement in the finally clause will override the return statement inside the try clause and the except clause. But okay, let's say we are trying to divide, we are trying to do a normal division, let's say 2 divided by 5. So definitely this will we are not omitting the return statement from the try, and we are returning something from the else. Let's say from here we are returning the result. Now in this case also, this since there will be no exception, the else clause will be executed, and from inside the else clause we have a return result, but eventually it will fall back to finally clause and we have a return 3. So return so the whole function will not return what it should return. It will not return 0.4, but it will return 3. See, it returned 3, but the result was 0.4. Over here it printed result equals to 0.4, but since the finally clause is returning 3, if you omit this thing, if we omit this return 3 from the finally clause, then I guess the function will return this result. Let's see. Yeah, so it returns 0.4. So I hope this video was helpful to you in understanding how the try statement works with all the except, else and finally clauses, and specifically how the return statement works if there are return statements in all the 3 clauses. If this video was beneficial, then please support me by liking this video, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to my channel if you are not yet subscribed, and please do not forget to press the bell icon so that you will be notified by my future videos as and when I will upload them. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, take care and bye.